Something that is always a load of fun in medieval and early modern alternate histories is plastering random nations together in unions. One nation specifically often included in these is Poland, mostly due to their real-life commonwealth with the Lithuanians. It is thus often wondered, what if they united with Russia too? Or united with the Bohemians instead? Or what if the Swedes managed to take control over the kingdom? Or indeed, what if they formed a Polish-Hungarian Commonwealth instead? The subject of today's video. Now the main issue with this scenario is that it is not as easy as often advertised in alternate history or in EU4 to actually merge and keep such realms together. Yes, especially in alternate history, it is often possible to get a king on the throne of multiple kingdoms, but this does not guarantee that they stay united. Case in point, Poland and Hungary actually were united under a single monarch 3 times in history. Most notably under Louis I of Hungary in 1370, but also in 1440 under Vladislav III, and for a few months in 1305, Wenceslaus of Bohemia also unified the crowns. Yet, in all of these cases, the union didn't last. Why is this? Well, a big reason is the nobles of these realms. In popular history, we like to imagine kings as decidedly above their nobles, a view primarily reinforced by the age of absolutism. But in the medieval and early modern period, it could often be the opposite. In realms with powerful nobles, which Hungary and Poland both belonged to, the kings found themselves in competition with, or even a puppet of, the nobility. Kings had to rely on their nobles for manpower and taxes, and often couldn't easily act without approval from their vassals. Whenever possible, the nobles also liked interfering on who could become king. It was often not as simple as the eldest son succeeds everywhere. If the nobles felt that an alternate path could be more aligned to their interests, or if the succession could in some way be contested, like with a female successor, they often did so. In this light, being under the same king also doesn't immediately unify 2 realms. Scotland and England retained separate parliaments for a century before the Acts of Union officially created the United Kingdom. The dynasty of Poland and Lithuania had mostly unified since 1385, but only in 1569 did they form a real union, unifying governing institutions. Aragon and Castile entered a personal union in 1479, but only in 1714 did Aragon's privileges get abolished and were the regions fully absorbed into a Castilian administration, requiring a civil war and French assistance to make it so. Point is, a personal union does not create a united state, and even after unifying 2 dynasties, a lot can later happen to break a union again. The creation of a Polish-Hungarian union is by no means unlikely, but I must preface my doubt in their remaining united, let alone integrating more closely together in the face of a strong nobility in both states which might oppose it. Not to mention other external risks like foreign claimants on their throne, and perhaps more pressingly, coming Ottoman expansionism into the Balkan and Hungary. Perhaps the best time to start such a union is through the previously mentioned Louis I. Ever since 1342, he had ruled the kingdoms of Hungary and Croatia, while his uncle Casimir III ruled in Poland. Upon Casimir's death, the Kingdom of Poland passed to his nephew, unifying the realms. Now Louis was a very competent ruler, expanding the influence of his realms, but upon his death an issue revealed itself. Louis had 3 children, Catherine, who died young, Mary and Jadwiga. You might see the issue here. In principle, Mary should have inherited the entire realm, yet her succession was unpopular in Hungary, partially because she was a woman, meaning her German husband would do the actual ruling, and partially because she was only 12. Meanwhile, Louis's wife Elizabeth positioned herself as regent for her daughter, attempting to steer the succession process. Several Hungarian nobles preferred a relative of Louis, Charles III of Naples, to succeed him in Hungary, which would cause a long civil war over succession, which Sigismund, the husband of Mary, would eventually win. After which, he would go on to rule Hungary, successfully campaign to become the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, as well as become the King of Bohemia too. Upon his death though, he too only had a daughter. That daughter was then married to Duke Albrecht the Magnanimous, who was none other than the Habsburg Duke of Austria, thereby for the first time, albeit temporarily, unifying Austria, Bohemia and Hungary, laying the foundation for decades of Habsburg rule over the Holy Roman Empire. Meanwhile, Poland should, according to Louis's will, have also gone to Mary, but in practice, the Polish nobles didn't like either Mary or Jadwiga as queen. Again, partially because they were women and underage, but once more, also because both were married to German husbands, and the Polish nobles too didn't want a German ruling them. Even more, Louis had already favored Hungary during his reign, even stripping Galician territories away from Poland and adding them to Hungary. It was feared that Mary could continue this policy, so the Poles reached an agreement to have her sister Jadwiga become the queen instead. Frantic back-and-forth negotiations between the Hungarian court and the Polish nobles ensued, with eventually the separate succession of Jadwiga being confirmed, and the Galician territories being returned to Poland as well. The nobles even forced Jadwiga to break her betrothal to William of Austria, instead having her marry Vladislav II Jagiello, the Grand Duke of Lithuania, laying the foundation for the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. This very oversimplified chaos shows the difficulty in keeping such medieval realms united, as by the end of this whole ordeal, the two nations had fully split. In theory, treaties were signed that if one of the daughters died without an heir, the realms would be reunited under the survivor. In practice, when Mary of Hungary died, her husband Sigismund simply continued ruling without her, and when Queen Jadwiga died, her husband Vladislav did the same. So, with all of these dynastic shenanigans out of the way, how do we keep the realms united? Well, there are two ways. In one, upon the death of Mary, the Kingdom of Hungary might default back to Jadwiga as promised. The issue, of course, is that nobody in Hungary would have wanted this. The easier option might be letting Louis get a male heir, ensuring that when he does die, there is as little debate over succession as possible. In our timeline, Louis and his wife had been married for 17 years before they had their first kid. The idea of a lucky male being born in this time is not crazy. At the very least, increasing the odds of creating a more successful union. I'm sorry for the quick intermission, but by far most of you aren't subscribed. To keep up to date with all the latest releases, consider doing so. Thank you. Now, what does all of this change? Well, these are medieval alternate histories, which by definition are extremely volatile. Our newly created King of Hungary Poland could at any point fall off his horse, die, and throw the realms into complete disarray anyways. So instead, what we're gonna do a lot is exploring some of the things we have removed from our own timeline. For example, Queen Jadwiga of Poland being removed means we also remove the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. But the Lithuanian Duke still needs a wife. Likewise, we have removed the rise of Sigismund, who again was crucial not just for his own achievements, but also for setting up the rise of the Habsburgs. Without him, the entire future of the German Empire, Bohemia, Austria and Hungary would be completely altered. So let's delve a bit into the Polish-Hungarian Union. Personally, I have quite little faith in this union when compared to our timeline's Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. This is for a number of reasons. First, a lack of a joint foreign policy objective. What binds these realms together besides their monarch and their military? This is quite an important question, especially early on in such a union. Poland and Lithuania chiefly had the Teutons to fight, and through this joint struggle, the union grew closer together. Poland and Hungary, on the other hand, are separated by the Carpathian Mountains, and their nobles have far less incentive for further integration. In fact, they had disputed territories amongst themselves over some eastern territories, which Louis had seized from Poland, much to their discontent. Second, both realms had very powerful noble families, more so than Lithuania. Between Poland and Lithuania, it was also very clear that Poland was the more powerful force, while between Hungary and Poland, power is much closer, making it far harder for either kingdom, likely Hungary, to actually succeed in dominating and taking away the autonomy of the other, making it more likely the union is eventually dissolved, or at least gets tested every time the previous king dies. Now third, Louis was already rather unpopular in Poland, seen as a foreign monarch who cared more about Hungary, an allegation which was not untrue. His successors will likewise struggle with this reputation in Poland, and a lot of energy needs to be spent in simply conserving the union, not just in terms of the military, but more importantly, diplomatically. In trying to keep these two noble-dominated realms together, kings may well have to continually grant privileges to the nobles in Poland to keep them on his side. The trouble with this policy? The stronger Poland becomes within this union, the more the nobles can demand, causing jealousy amongst Hungarian nobles who likewise demand increases in their privileges, or even a culling of Polish privileges in their favor. Now it is possible we find a king capable of navigating these difficulties, but I doubt we find 3 in a row, or 5, or 10. Without some strong unifying factors, which in my opinion are heavily missing here, this union will always remain fragile at best. As a result, I don't expect major foreign policy moves in the short term. Of course, it is possible these kings have a scuffle with the Teutons, fight with the Lithuanians, or try to continue Louis's policy of subjugating the Western Balkan. But I doubt any of this will result in major expansion. Especially the general focus of the monarchs on Hungary likely benefits the Crusader states in the north, who even with the full force of Poland and Lithuania were very difficult to defeat. In the worst case for Poland, we could end up in a scenario where the Teutons survive, Mazovia isn't subjugated, and Hungary keeps and consolidates their hold over the eastern territories, leaving the Polish kingdom weak and embittered. Yet even still, Poland's suffering does not mean that Hungary prospers. It probably costs more to keep Poland under control than it gives Hungary in terms of gold and men. Considering the many threats facing Poland, it's not like Hungary can pull away all the Polish power and use it to become lord and master over the Balkan. And then we need to consider whether this alternate Hungary would be more prepared to deal with the greatest threat to this union, the Ottomans. It's unlikely we see something as radical as the Polish nobles aligning themselves to the Turks to destroy the Hungarians. But just like in our timeline, the chaotic kingdom of Hungary, with disloyal nobles and weak central government, is just unlikely to stand up to the sheer destructive force that were the early Ottomans. In our timeline, we saw a massive coalition, including both Hungary and Poland, try to defeat the Turks in the Crusade of Varna, and the Turks actually won. I have no reason to believe an alternate Hungary-Poland would be more successful here. So with the Hungarians more than likely facing defeats against the Turks, this would be the perfect opportunity for Poland to reassert their sovereignty, perhaps even striking the weakened Hungary for their eastern territory. Alternatively, the union may persist, but the Poles are now suddenly the dominant partner in this union, ruling over the rump Hungarian state. There though, there's no guarantee about their future success, especially with just how much weaker Poland is overall. It's very possible that upon the decline of the Ottomans, a power like the Habsburgs swoops in anyways, or a new Hungarian dynasty rises up. But if the Poles do establish themselves the dominant partner in this union, and centuries later they are the ones to push back the Turks, the Polish-Hungarian Commonwealth may finally be re-established as a powerful Eastern European force. Though of course, the now Polish kings need to be wary that the cycle of noble demands, privileges and infighting doesn't restart all over again. And considering how the Hungarians continually struggled against the Habsburgs for their independence and autonomy, even after all of this, I doubt we would be seeing an all too stable union. Now going back in time and discussing the consequences elsewhere, Duke Vladislav of Lithuania greatly interests me, as he was in a pretty difficult position. Lithuania was the final, major pagan state in Europe, but the times were changing, and the duchy found itself in need of a new religion to secure their position on the continent, and hopefully end the constant crusading by the Teutons. So, tied to his potential conversion were two potential brides, Queen Jadwiga of Poland and Princess Sophia, the daughter of Dmitry of Muscovy. In the case of marriage with Jadwiga, Poland and Lithuania would become tied together in personal union, and Jagiello would convert to Catholicism. In case of marriage with Sophia, there are improved relations, but no direct union between Lithuania and Muscovy, but Lithuania does convert to Orthodoxy. Both had advantages and disadvantages. Obviously, gaining the Polish throne was appealing, and Poland could help fight the Teutons. On the other hand, much of Lithuania's territory was Orthodox. Either way though, in this alternate timeline, Jadwiga is simply not an option, going on to marry William of Habsburg as planned, thereby leaving Jagiello few options more attractive than marrying the Princess of Muscovy, very potentially changing the dynamics of Eastern Europe yet further. Now we must be clear, this is unlikely to directly lay the foundation for a Muscovite-Lithuanian union. Sophia was just one of many daughters. Yet still, the Lithuanian and Muscovite royal families would now be dynastically and diplomatically intertwined, while the two states represent the most powerful Orthodox realms. Through this, we have a couple branching timelines for Eastern Europe. First, the states might remain completely separate, even becoming hostile later on. After all, a few marriages and the same religion doesn't prevent geopolitical, territorial tension. The growing Russian state always has a natural expansion path into the flatlands of Ruthenia. Option 2, the two states become allies, but leave it at that. They both appreciate the peaceful border, both pursuing different expansion opportunities. Then, finally, not immediately, but somewhere down the line, a full-scale personal union is established, a Russo-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Now in the first scenario, Lithuania is going to have a very rough time. They have replaced union with Poland with nothing. Their wars with the Teutons continue, but they now stand alone. Considering Poland-Lithuania together failed to contain Muscovy, I don't see the Lithuanians doing any better here. The specifics of their decline I cannot say, but unless they find another very powerful benefactor, which may be a lot more difficult now that they are Orthodox, their decline at the hands of the Russians and the Turks, and potentially even the Poles, seems very likely. Alternatively, the two might actually become solid allies. This may moderately speed up the formation of a unified Russian state, and with Lithuania's help, they may even defeat the Tatars a bit sooner. From here though, things get difficult. The main problem is there even a reason for an alliance to last after this? Fact is, Russia just has the far better foundation than Lithuania, the more stable power base, and thanks to Lithuania itself, a completely secure western border, which is almost certainly untrue for Lithuania. Yes, during the early centuries, Lithuania has a lot to offer Muscovy during their rise to the top, but I am not so sure the reverse is actually true. Is Russia going to be sending significant forces to defend against attacks from Poland? Are they going to be the deciding factor against the Teuton Crusades? I somewhat doubt it. Once the Tatars are weakened, and perhaps the Baltic subjugated, what joint enemies are there? Denmark and Sweden, maybe. If anything, I might expect Russia to eventually turn on their ally anyways. But assuming they don't, it would be interesting to see a Russia mostly focused on expansion east and into the Baltic Sea. Fundamentally though, even in this case, I would expect Lithuania to gradually become a mere buffer state for the Russians. The third option takes this even further. Following this first marriage, cooperation continues. The royal families grow further entwined, and eventually, a few decades or a century later, an actual personal union is formed. Now, as I've stressed before, this doesn't guarantee permanent unification. But I do think that Lithuania is quite an easy realm to integrate comparatively, especially for Muscovy, who I expect to be the dominant power in the long term. Playing out the various Ruthenian nobles against Lithuania while slowly expanding their hegemony over the Union, not unlike what Poland did historically, would be quite possible. This could then set up for a rather powerful Rus far earlier. Bad news for the rest of Eastern Europe, as defeating this rising behemoth seems rather difficult. Alternatively, the Lithuanians could still dominate the Union. This is more likely if it occurs sooner, when Lithuania was still the larger state. If this happened, it could be really interesting, as it is quite possible this could greatly reduce the expansionism of the new state. For Lithuania, conquest on the scale of Muscovy and the Rus wasn't necessarily as desired. If anything, the more they expand, the more the Rus element would come to overpower the Lithuanian nobles. If the Lithuanians pursue a more peaceful course, we may yet see the union breaking later on, but its very existence would have delayed the formation of a unified Rus state, and both states now continue having a claim on the throne of the other. In this wacky timeline, we might even see Novgorod survive in the northwest, the Tatars not being subjugated around the same time, and Eastern Europe on the whole becoming a lot more chaotic. Now as for the Holy Roman Empire, strap in, as we have removed two rather important events. The House of Luxembourg had dominated the empire for a couple of decades, by this point ruling Luxembourg, Bohemia and Brandenburg. Yet Emperor Wenceslaus managed to get the emperorship taken away from him, instead being granted to the rival family of the von Wittelsbachs. But luckily for the Luxembourgs, we have Sigismund, the historical king of Hungary. As you'll remember, in our timeline he was married to Mary, the Queen of Hungary. From his power base there, he would invade Bohemia and regain the imperial crown. But, as is a theme in this video, his only living child was a daughter. Said daughter married Albrecht of Austria, and as a result, the rule of the Luxembourgs naturally transitioned to the start of the Habsburg hegemony. All of this is now substantially changed. It is quite possible Sigismund is still married to Mary, but the marriage to Mary doesn't provide him another crown, only a loose continued partnership with Hungary-Poland. It might be possible Sigismund seeks an alternate wife, but unless I am mistaken, there is no huge alternative single queen for Sigismund to marry. So instead, he would focus on being the Elector of Brandenburg, a title which he had in our timeline sold to his nephew Jobst to raise money to go fight in Hungary, before later on granting it to the family of Hohenzollern. Neither of these things would now happen, meaning the dynasty that went on to form Prussia and later Germany doesn't get their most important power base in this timeline. There are 7 electors which chose the emperors during this time, and historically 3 Luxembourgs, Wenceslaus, Sigismund and Jobst vied for the title of the emperor, while the Wittelsbachs also tried to get involved. Jobst historically got 4 out of the 7 votes, but he died and Sigismund got the title instead. All of this is changed here. Jobst lacks the electorate of his own, and Sigismund is significantly weaker and doesn't have a clear power base to bribe or threaten electors from. As such, I'm going to posit a number of potential alternative dynastic and political shenanigans, none of which are easy to predict in long-term detail. But essentially, the three dynasties vying for control were the Luxembourgs, the Wittelsbachs and the Habsburgs. And as mentioned, the end of the Luxembourgs coincided with the rise of the Habsburgs. Let's explore a couple plausible alternatives in this timeline. Sigismund is the most important. He starts as the Elector of Brandenburg, but eventually inherits Bohemia from his brother. Now in our timeline, the lack of a male heir caused his lands to pass to the Habsburgs. And that leaves us with two options here. It's not unthinkable he just does get a male heir in this timeline, as this is an aspect of alternate history that is mostly just chance. In which case, the Luxembourgs continue ruling over Brandenburg Bohemia, a major power within the empire, greatly halting the rise of any clear, dominating family as we saw in our timeline. But if the male line of Luxembourgs still dies with Sigismund, then who he marries his daughter to will be crucial. If he still marries the Habsburgs, we could have created a quite interesting timeline, in which the Habsburgs consolidate Brandenburg instead of Hungary. While initially the Kingdom of Hungary seems like the better price, considering all of the conflict which emanated from it, the wars with the Turks that followed, and the constant pestering of the Hungarian nobles, Brandenburg may well prove better over time. Even if the Habsburgs devolve the electorate to another family member, having yet another elector under their control makes getting elected easier, while the Habsburgs find themselves much better invested in Germany itself. It wouldn't be unreasonable to suggest that it may even be plausible that the Habsburgs slowly curb the autonomy of the German states. And even in this timeline, it is possible that Hungary, desperate to get out from under the Turkish invasion, finds itself controlled by the Habsburgs in the long term anyways. Now besides the previous two options, mega Habsburgs and competition between the main families, the electors could even choose to return to electing weaker and compromised candidates. Since at least 3 electors are in the hands of the major families, gaining a comfortable majority might just prove too difficult. The crown of the emperor may start rotating between smaller noble families, eroding central authority yet further. Alternatively, as the Ottoman Empire threatens the east, and the French consolidate their control over the west, the electors might instead start looking at a powerful foreign king to sort out their troubles. So honestly, except for the larger Habsburg scenario, I would expect the Holy Roman Empire to be even weaker than that of our timeline. We never reach the point, like in our timeline, where one family is just so obviously the most powerful. Even if, say, the Wittelsbachs secure the throne for a bit, same with the Habsburgs or the Luxembourgs, it is just far less likely their rule lasts centuries like the Habsburgs historically. And outside powers, especially France and the Ottomans, might benefit greatly from this weakening. So, in conclusion, had Louis I had an adult male heir and thereby continued the Polish-Hungarian personal union, history would have been significantly altered. Even if the union itself would not be harmonious, the changes very much are not contained there. As is the nature of medieval scenarios, a few crucial marriages changing can completely alter the religion, priorities and leaders across the region, leading to a large variety of outcomes which, from our perspective, feel completely strange and unrealistic, but really, such outcomes are not necessarily more crazy than what we saw historically. Just because it didn't happen in real life doesn't necessarily mean it is implausible. For now though, this is the end of the video. Thank you all for watching and consider leaving a like and a comment as well as subscribing. If you've enjoyed this video, click the video on top to watch another in this series. If you've already seen it, I'm sure the bottom video is great too. Once again, thank you all for watching and goodbye.